So, I come here as a Jersey girl. I fell in love with the ocean when I was about 3 years old, got knocked over by a wave, and the ocean got my attention, and it has held my attention ever since. Isn't just the great fun of being out in, on, and under the ocean. It's life in the ocean that captured my imagination as a little kid, and I still have that same sense of curiosity. Kids ask me sometimes, how did you get to be a scientist? And I say, it really is pretty easy. You start out as a little kid, we all do. And what do little kids do? You ask questions. It's who, what, why, where, when, how. Just don't ever stop. To be a scientist, do what scientists do. You observe carefully, you report honestly, and you never stop asking questions. And here's the thing, anybody can do it. Everybody should do it. And it doesn't matter how tall you are, how short you are, how old you are, how young you are, what color you are, whoever you are, you should do what scientists do. Observe carefully, look at the evidence, and then act on what you see. So I try to follow my own advice, and I don't think I will ever quite grow up if I'm lucky. But I grew up enough that by 1970, I had credentials as a scientist. And while I was at Harvard, there's a notice on the bulletin board during the time that there were astronauts flying high in the sky. That first view of Earth from space was in 1968 when the young Bill Anders looked out the window of the spacecraft while making a circumnavigation of the moon and took that picture called Earthrise of this miraculous blue planet, our home. Everything has changed since then. In 1970, when there were footprints being left on the moon, there was a notice about being an aquanaut, to live underwater for 2 weeks. Nobody bothered to say that women need not apply, so some of us did. Big surprise when our credentials turned out to be, comparable with some of the guys. And so it came down to the question of the head of the program, whether to let women become aquanauts. After all, there were no women astronauts for another 15 years. So the idea was a little novel, but Jim Miller, head of the program, had a good marriage, he had a good mother, I think. And he is said to have said, after shrugging his shoulders, well, half the fish are female. I guess we could put up with a few women. And they did, but they couldn't really get their minds around having men and women living together underwater. Now, this is 1970. Astronauts since then, mixed teams. We ride on airplanes. We're here in the audience. There are men and women out there, I think, both. But to stay underwater in 1970, they were talking about hanky-panky on the reef. But anyway, they let us go, but they had to just have a women's team. But we weren't aquanauts, we were the aqua babes. We were the aqua chicks, the aqua belles. We were even called the aquanauties. I love that one. Didn't matter what they called us, just so we got to go. And since then, I've lived underwater on 10 different occasions, men and women together sometimes. And I've had a chance to spend thousands of hours underwater. I've used more than 30 different kinds of submarines. So cool. I'm sure every one of you has been up in the sky, probably 7 miles up in the sky, but only on 3 occasions have people been as much as 7 miles down. The deepest place is the Mariana Trench. It's not that deep when you think about it, 7 miles. But, we're just at the greatest era of exploring the ocean ever. We've only seen maybe 10% of the ocean, really beyond the surface. And just as in the early days of aviation, a century ago, it was novel to be able to go down in the submarine. Maybe in another few years, it'll be easy. You know, you'll have a Hertz Rent-A-Sub or something. Or whatever it takes, we've got to get out there and understand the blue part of our own home. As a witness to the ocean, a witness to the greatest era of change that this planet has ever experienced since the middle of the 20th century. And you think about what we could not know 50, 60, 100 years ago. How surprised would our predecessors be if they could land here today and pick up that little cell phone that we're all addicted to, or have images come out of nowhere right there in front of us, that we could speak to people on the other side of the planet. There's so many things that we now have that give us superpowers that our predecessors would envy if they could only see what the world has become in a positive way, but they would also be horrified if they could see how we've consumed this blue planet, how much we have taken from nature to foster our prosperity. There were only 2 billion people when I arrived, only 1 billion going back to 1800. Now, you know the numbers. We're going to be 8 billion soon and projected even more by the middle of this century. So how are we going to accommodate ourselves within the natural systems that keep us alive? That's our challenge. So 100 years ago, we began protecting nature with national parks. Only more recently have we begun to do a similar thing for the ocean. I mean, 100 years ago, we were still taking birds in large quantities for food. We changed our ways. We take a lot of chickens, but most birds we respect for other reasons. We have to look at wildlife on the land and in the ocean with new eyes, with new respect. Take care of them as part of our life support system. Right now, only about 3% of the ocean is really protected, where even the fish are safe. Think about it. We now know that protecting the land works. We know that protecting the ocean works, when recovery is possible if we stop the killing and start the caring. So a few years ago, 10 years ago, I started an organization called Mission Blue, the idea of establishing protected areas around the world, hope spots large enough to save and restore the blue part of the planet. So, embracing ambition, I think we all have the opportunity to embrace the biggest ambition that all of us, any of us, should have, sort of the headline for our lives. We have to take care of the planet. We have to take care of the natural world that makes our existence possible. As never before, we know what we could not know before. We know about climate change. We know about how we've really taken down the wildlife. We know that protection works, not just because we care about elephants and tuna fish and whales and all of that, but we care about the future of our children. Thank you for all you're doing to make the world a better place, embracing the ambition. Now is the time. Thank you.